A friend just bought this 60s Vibrolux Reverb. I haven't dated it yet. I'm going to get some chocolates and flowers at the ready. But anyway, as he is a very smart man, he asked me to take a look at this and make sure it was safe to power on before he even tried it. Because old filter caps, if this thing has all the original caps inside, dry out. And when they dry out, they are no longer really capacitors anymore. And when you apply power to them and expect them to be capacitors, many times they just say, okay, I'll catch on fire now. So let's open this up and see if this is even safe to plug in. Okay, it has a 3-prong power cable. No rectifier tube. Fender Musical Instruments. It's got some Eminence Alnico speakers, which may be great. Let's see what we see. And the reverb pedal connection has been changed to a 1/4 inch, as has the vibrato pedal. And they've got this old, well, it's not that important, but they've got an old PV foot switch there, which is actually a much better foot switch for use than the old Fender one, which I always kick over. No reason not to use 1/4 inch for that. Let's take it out of the chassis, see what we see. Okay, it's got a 3-conductor power cable. No rectifier tube. It's either missing or someone put it to solid state. There's a pretty good split in this cleat. The screw's just spinning, but that's easy thing to glue and clamp. It's got some Eminence Alnico speakers, which may be great. The vibrato pedal and reverb pedal connections have been changed from RCA to 1/4 inch. And he's came with this PV foot switch, which has 1/4 inch connectors. And this, frankly, is a much better foot switch than the one that Fenders use, that little bitty thing that I always kick across the stage. But I've got great big feet. So let's pull this from the cabinet and see what we see. Well, the chocolate and the flowers did the trick. I have successfully dated this amp. At least the iron in it is from '66. All 4 are '66. That doesn't look very nice. Does that tighten up? It's pretty loose and that flange has been bent. But that's a fairly easy thing to redo. All right, let's see what's underneath the doghouse and how bad the doghouse is. All right, nothing's ever exploded in here, so that's good. Our friend, the Illinois capacitors. These look okay. I don't see any visible sign of leakage. Now, in the Fender Reissue series and Blues series and Hot Rod series, I replace the IC brand caps pretty much on site whenever possible. But Illinois Capacitor is part of a very large company, and they make a lot of different capacitors, different specs. Fender, since the 90s, has been speccing out the cheapest of the cheap. And you get the performance and longevity that comes along with that. But the brand itself makes some capacitors that are fairly good, and these may be these are physically longer than the 22s that Fender's using today. So I'm not automatically going to change these out. What is of interest here is that the previous tech, rather than wiring two 60 microfarads or two 22 microfarads in parallel, as per the original 66 amp would have been, has gone to 200 microfarad 350 volt caps in series, which gives this node here a total voltage handling of 700 volts versus the 500 you get with two modern caps in parallel, or I believe the 450 volts that the originals would have had. And this leads me to think that when we flip this amp over, rather than just lacking a rectifier tube, there'll be diodes in place to give it solid state rectification, which leads to higher B+, especially unloaded. So that 700 volt capacity was probably a good thing. But these caps do not have the voltage balance resistors across them, which would force each capacitor to have exactly half the voltage present. So if 500 volts is present, and there are two 220K resistors, one across each capacitor, and there actually are 220K each, it would force each capacitor to only ever see 250 volts across it. Without those resistors, you can have a capacitor that draws more voltage than the other, and in some instances that can cause a premature failure of one cap, at which point the other cap, poor thing, is being rated for 350 volts, has 500 volts on it, and it fails as well. That has not happened here, and it may not happen here, but it's best practice to ensure that the caps are happy by putting voltage balance resistors across them. But in this case, since these caps are run in series, but they have the hots here and the negatives here, and this red added wire is the connection from the negative of this cap to the positive of this cap, it will be very easy for me to add them. I can add one here and add one here, and then it'll be nice and safe. And it's got 10K metal oxides, so I'm not seeing anything worrisome in here. It's not as pretty as I like to do them, but it should be just fine. Just needs some added resistors here to make sure that these last as long as possible. Starting at the bias, you can see it's got the classic transformer mounted grounds from 66, which are not the best, but sometimes can just be tightened depending on the owner's budget. It's replaced bias cap, original thing, everything else. Those solder joints aren't the prettiest, but it's easy to reflow. Just looking through the pots, you can see all that dirt everywhere. Replaced resistor here and here. That mids resistor doesn't look like it has the world's best solder joint to that casing. And you can see some replaced coupling caps, which is a shame. They almost never really fail in old fenders from this era. In the video on the 64, I mentioned that later fenders went to a wire for the grounds on the volumes. And here's a good example of that. So from 64 to 66, that change came in place. All right, it's got some more metal oxides on the plates. It's got a lot of dirt everywhere. Replace caps here, maybe 70s, 80s. It's got some carbon films here. Replace bypass caps. Orange drop, metal oxides. Film. One metal oxide, one original, or I don't think it would be original, a 1 watt there. It might have been. And, these are the DME caps. What are these? I pause this and see if I can read it. I think these are Zycons. Well, it's a shame that those original caps were replaced. They probably did not need to be, I suspect. And, at the risk of sounding big-headed, this is not something that I just feel. This is something that I've empirically tested and verified. Most of the time when a tech replaces these caps, it's actually problems with DC on the board, not problems with the caps. And a lot of times this is the case for these old resistors. So carbon films certainly can become noisy, but the noise of a resistor is exacerbated if there's a layer of funk on everything. And this board is certainly dirty. Anyway, let's take a look at all the preamp sockets and work weighted output. So there's been some spills in this amp in the past, you can see. I'll check these 1/4-inch jacks added for the reverb and tremolo connections later. Make sure they're switchcraft and they're good. All right, so someone already tried to fix the mounting on that output transformer. I don't think they did the world's best job. We can do better than this. All right, let's have the screen grid replaced with these acceptable but high mass 5 watts. All right, I'm glad I didn't just stick a rectifier tube in here. They've got solid state rectification with some diodes here. It's using the tube socket, but that's probably the player's choice. For a lot of magic gets attributed to rectifier tubes, good and bad. This is not done to code. When we flip the angle around, we'll see how the power wiring was actually done. Okay, so the ground is not longer than the hot and neutral. It should be. Hot goes here, and then they retain the depth cap, and the hot is going to the switch, and the neutral is fused, so they retain the old non-safety code wiring. And you can see a whole bunch of funk in this. Remember all that cleaning I just did on that 64 twin? And it looked better than this to begin with. But I'm not seeing anything in here that tells me this amp would be unsafe to use. I respectfully disagree with some of the decisions previous techs have made in this. So I bet they had good intentions. I don't think this was a rip-off thing, but it's a shame to have a 66 Fender that is increasingly made very, very modern with these metal oxides and such. Let's see what the voltages are like and how it sounds. All right, I'm going to power it on in standby with the voltage limiter, the current limiter in place, just in case there's anything really wrong. And there's no switch at all to the power switch. So it needs a new power switch because it's just really soft. It does come on, but it's not a click. And that's a sign of a mechanical fault inside the switch that could start arcing and give failure while playing. So better to change that out before it fully fails. Let's turn it on. The lamp is glowing. And I've got the current limiter on, which limits the voltage. So this won't tell us the full max, though I will be verifying that in a minute. We've got 700 volts capacity on the filter caps for the reservoir node and 500 for everything else. I'm pretty sure even with the solid state rectification that everything will be well under that. So we're at 473 unloaded B+. Take it out of standby. That drops to 420, and the screen node has got 413. So let me power it off and turn off the current limiter. There were no fireworks. That's good. Put it back in standby and power it on again. Actually, we put it in standby, out of standby with it powered off, and make sure all the voltage is gone. All right, we're good. Back in standby, power it on. And now without the current limiter, the unloaded B+ is 481. So that's good. It's not going to exceed the rating of the downstream caps as it's taken out of standby. Literally quick and dirty test. We're going to just move the volume pots. No nastiness there. No nastiness there. The buyer seems to be getting very, very lucky with this purchase. Slight bit of scratchiness there, but that's just a pot that needs cleaning. Let's measure voltages on the board. Nothing, 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 nothing. So this does not have the problems that 64 Twin did, even though this is visibly much dirtier. All right, that node, which is often problematic, 44 millivolts, that's almost nothing. All right, so this amp by some miracle has no issue introduced by all this dirt. And the voltages all seem to be just fine. So let me pause this and check the bias real quick. Well, the bias is fine. They're idling at 47% and 44%, so they're well matched. They're on the cool side, but that's easy to adjust. Let's see how it's sounding. Before I play, I noticed that with nothing plugged into the vibrato foot switch connection, the vibrato is on, it's flashing. I can see the bulb. And that just means that they've normaled it to be grounded out, which is actually one of my preferences, so that if nothing's plugged in the foot switch, you just have front control over whether you hear vibrato or not. Let's see how the normal channel is sounding. There's no DC on the grids, no issue detected whatsoever. Let's go to the reverb channel, the vibrato channel. So I'm not getting any ticking from the vibrato. That's good. See if there's reverb hum. Yeah, I'll test that with the tank in a little bit. Let's see how the tremolo is doing. Let's start with the slow speed. Well, aside from the tremolo not keeping up with the speed knob as you turn it up real fast because of that cap right there, everything else seems fine. It's nice, slow, deep trem. No real ticking. So what I'm thinking at this point, while there is the option to put all this back closer to where it would have been as far as carbon comps, as far as film caps versus ceramic here and there, and the types used, this amp is not in need of repair it's in need of a cleaning. That phase inverter tube socket's got some gronk in it. And it would benefit everything to be cleaned. That's an easy thing to do in this case. It needs a new power switch. It needs to have the power wiring redone to safety code. I'm going to make sure all the pots are tight and the jacks are tight and cleaned. And, tuck some of this old wiring back where it used to be. But the owner got very, very lucky. Let's see how the old reverb tank and speakers sound. Well, they have this big kludge in here to make this PV foot switch work, and I'll certainly be offering to make that a lot easier. But it does work as far as the vibrato goes. That pops, which it should not do. So I'll take a look at that as well. But the reverb doesn't seem to be working. And the reverb tank is both unsecured and upside down. Well, the reverb tank has to be so that the tank springs are down and the RCA connector is facing that way, the front of the cab. That's a sign of bad. That noise was coming as I jiggled these. I don't know which is send and return. Let's see. All right, so that ain't it. There's a noise. But no reverb. So let's take a look inside this tank. Oh dear, what do I feel here? So that was me dropping the reverb tank on the guitar. I'm going to turn the volume off on the guitar. And these wires were all crammed up in there. And let me just confirm what goes where. This should be the input wire. All right, so these are definitely backwards. Input here is reversed from input at the tank. So now, let me disconnect the foot switch. We should have some, I turn the tremolo off. We should have reverb. All right, that sound is not the sound of a healthy tank. So, I swear, sometimes you can't make this stuff up. This was in here, this foam block. No wonder the reverb sounded like shit, or was barely there. Let's see if that fixed it, or whether there's some other problem that was trying to cure. right, nothing with that. But that cable was making so much noise, I don't really trust it. So let's try some different cables. Okay. That sounded pretty nice. These speakers are sounding pretty nice too. Even with the back off the cab. Nice low end from a 2x10. It's funny, a 1x10 is never anything to write home about with as far as low end goes. Get to a 2x10 and you're in business. 4x10, forget about it. All right, so remember at the beginning of this video I said, never plug in an amp that you haven't had checked out because it could catch on fire. And you might think watching this, well, clearly it didn't catch on fire, so that's hyperbole. No, the owner got lucky, just like the guys do. But you get lucky 9 times in a row. That 10th time will get you. And as it turns out, this amp does need service anyway, so the owner was smart either way. Needs to have the power cable redone to safety code. Needs new reverb tank wires. Needs a pretty thorough cleaning of the cab. There's dust bunnies from 1967 in there. Needs to have the bag installed correctly and secured to the chassis. Not the chassis, the cabinet. It needs to have a new power switch. The wiring to use that PV foot switch is a little bit over the top. The PV has a TRS plug and they split it off to 2/4 inch, and that one's normal to be off if nothing's plugged in. If you want to do that, it's easy just to replace one of these with a TRS jack and have the other one not in service. I will also give the owner the option of putting these back to the original RCAs, and we can get a good quality RCA connector foot switch for it. Not the Fender reissue, because they cost a lot more and they're made like crap. That white wire breaks if you look at it too hard, but there are options for about $25 that sound great, work great, and don't like to break. The front panel has got a little bit of a bend at the lip over by the indicator light. If the owner would like me to, I can remove the front panel, clamp it all flat, and put it back on. That's cosmetic rather than a repair. It's going to depend on his budget. The tubes all seem fine. He's missing a tube shield in the phase inverter. It's not much of a big deal. That phase inverter socket and all the sockets will get cleaned. The output transformer is really wiggly and barely held in place, so that needs to be secured. And there's just a slight bit more of a background noise than I would like. Let's see if that's related to the reverb tank. Got the volume up on the guitar. All right, the tremolo, as it has been on for a while, has started to tick. Now there is a capacitor that you can add across the roach between ground and the bulb side that can detick that. But since that ticking started as the amp warmed up and got hot inside, I would not be surprised if cleaning the board goes a long way towards that. So I would like to clean the board and all those wires and get everything as good as possible. There's also a little bit of a cleat repair to make here up by the power cord. But overall, I think, I don't know what he paid for it, but he got a good amp. And I would really like to hear this thing in all its glory soon.